Hi, everyone. It is day 6, and today's mantra is going to be wisdom. All right, we'll be right with it. Just 1 second.
So one of the themes that we've been coming up on a lot is, the power of information, the power of systems that work, and also debunking all of the propaganda and noise out there. So there's a lot of noise, right? Where people will get bickering over these little tiny things. And in the meantime, the big picture is very different than the thing they're arguing over, right? So like, people argue over electric vehicles and lithium ion batteries and aren't they dirty? And of course, they're not as dirty as lead acid, but both are single occupancy vehicles, not a good way to get people around, especially in cities. So, you miss the bigger picture because you're not focused on wisdom. It's still a lot of like finger pointing and blah, 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 blah. Greta Thunberg famously said earlier, blah, blah, blah. So wisdom is what we really want to get at. Like a lot of the dirty nature of the ramification of our actions are hidden from us, right? Like we don't think when we hear about the rainforest being destroyed, that has anything to do with our toilet paper. We don't think necessarily, although I hope we will now, when there's an oil spill, that has to do with us gassing up at the pump. We don't think about our electricity at all, most of us, right? We don't think we should fix the leaks. We aren't cognizant of the fact that our electricity is very dirty. In some places, it's the dirtiest thing possible. And that all of our cooking and heating, or most of our cooking and heating, is natural gas as well. So wisdom is really important. And today, because we've talked about all these other things that I just mentioned, we're going to talk about wisdom in agriculture, because agriculture is that final wedge in CO2 emissions. Now, again, I kind of alluded to it in the first day where we talked about, have you heard there was this famous thing going around that cow farts were more polluting than cars. Not true at all. I think it's really important to have it in headlines that over a third of all of the CO2 emissions in the modern era are due to 20 fossil fuel companies. And in the top 5 is ExxonMobil and Chevron. Okay, so that not only are these companies that we use, it's also companies that we invest in and profit from polluters. So we have all kinds of ways that we can get wise, but let's now direct ourselves back to agriculture. So how did they come up with that statistic that a cow fart is more polluting than cars? Well, they're adding in everything, right? And I did allude to this. They're saying, okay, well, we have to create the feed. And of course, the feed is not pastures. Again, if you have an organic farm and part of your crop rotation is clover, and the cows or the sheep come in to mow the lawn for you and then fertilize it with their manure, that's very different than an industrialized farm that was created by destroying a rainforest, and then they grow grain to feed the cows so that they get more yield on the milk, although they don't get as much longevity, and the cows become infertile. Their systems were not really created for grain, and so they then might need antibiotics, all of these things. So the amount of feed and the petrochemicals used, and then the feed has to be carted to the cows and fed to the cows instead of them just walking all over a clover pasture. And then that farm is an industrial farm that is usually very far from the consumer. So then they add in all of the trucking to the consumer. So that's where they come up with that statistic. And since most people are eating industrialized meat, then yeah, the statistic is right when you add in everything like that, right? So getting smart about what's actually behind the data. And so you're not kind of just left immobilized and again, paralysis by overanalysis, not at all based in wisdom, based on confusion, because people that are confused and don't know what to do tend to not do anything. They just do what they're doing. And that's how we come 50 years after the fact that we were first concerned about all this nonsense, that it is now a crisis. So we have to stop the misinformation. We have to stop the propaganda. We have to stop the bickering. We have to stop all of these things that are misleading, but have a grain of truth in them, and get to the wisdom. So I'm going to show you some inspiring stories of agriculture. But the bottom line is that if you, it's better for your health, and it's absolutely better for the planet, not to use petrochemicals, not to use fertilizers, herbicides, all of these are poisons, not to use those on our plants. And as Jane Goodall said, it just perplexes me why we would want to put poison on our own food. It's not good for us. It's not good for the soil. It's not good for the water, as we've talked about in the dead zone. So what is organic, where we are using Mother Nature's natural systems to control our pests, the natural systems to create our composting and our manure. All right, so let me show you the inspiring stories. Your action today, by the way, if you aren't already doing it, is to start composting. And most cities have composting in their green bin. If yours doesn't yet, then you can go to, I believe the EPA has composting guidelines, and you can do it yourself. If you do it right, there's no risk of rodents or smell at all. So composting is going to be key. And the other thing is that either start your own garden, and not an aero garden on your countertop, a real garden with soil. There's a million reasons for that, outlined in the book. Again, I'm giving you 21 days here for free, and I'm giving you a lot of information. I'm not trying to just sell you a book. I'm saying is that, you know, I'm able in 250 pages to give you a boatload more than I can give you in 10 minutes for 21 days, okay? So let's dig into it, but your action is going to be start composting and start a garden. Now, if you don't want to, if you like, what if you're in an apartment? Okay, so go and volunteer at the local elementary school and start a garden there. Go and volunteer to set up a community garden, okay? Do something. Let's get some soil and carbon sequestration and organic food going. And by the way, that's one last thing I want to say about wisdom. So some people were saying, well, or you're saying organic food, but what about organic food that doesn't have the label? Well, look, your little school garden, if you don't use any pesticides and you're using composting, is organic, right? But it doesn't have the label. So you got to use your own wisdom on this. If you're getting eggs from the neighbor and you know that they don't use any chemicals, petrochemicals on their plants, and the chickens are running around in the yard, then that's pretty organic, right? Okay. Also, one last tip. If you're looking at produce in a grocery store, I'm not positive this is worldwide, but it's absolutely in the US. It's 5 digits and it starts with a 9. That's organic food. If it's anything else, it's not organic. If it's 4 digits and it starts with 3 or 4, it's not organic. If it's 5 digits and it starts with an 8, it's a GMO. So only 5 digits that starts with a 9 is organic, okay? All right, let's dig into a few inspiring stories. The first one I wanted to share with you was Ron Finley. And he lived in a food desert. And as you can see, these kids are actually sitting on the side of the street. He started planting trees and food in the verge between the sidewalk and the street. And the city sued him and he won. And so he now has a TED Talk that's been viewed over 3 million or 4 million times. By the time you watch this, it could be even higher than that. And he teaches everybody how to be a gardener, right? And he's, again, he's doing it. He has a place in his house. He has this spot between the street and the sidewalk. He feeds kids that come by. He has a very active Instagram that you can follow. Also in Compton, which is another food desert, these people came together to create the Compton Community Gardens. Anybody can rent one of those boxes for $50. That can feed a family of 4 for 6 months. The local fire department rents it. So I do encourage you to check out, the book lists a lot more information on these 2 projects. There's also the Prince of Wales. You see him here constructing his own hedge, like having an organic, look, if you have livestock, if you have sheep and you have cows, you definitely need to manage which fields they're in and which fields they're not. But hedges also provide a corridor for birds and butterflies and a lot of other things that are going to be very beneficial. I didn't even know that bees, well, I should have known, obviously, but bees love trees, right? So, the hedges are good for the bees too. And obviously this particular photo was taken on the home farm that was established by the Prince of Wales back in late 1979-ish. And it was transformed to organic by him and his farm manager, David Wilson, who is the one that taught me about organic. Not obviously, I haven't been through a course like at Cambridge and gotten my certification. And, but, I have learned from a lot of these great farmers and gardeners. There's also plenty of schoolyard projects. So the Edible Schoolyard by Alice Waters has curriculum for middle school, and Green Our Planet has curriculum for elementary schools. I do encourage you to check them out as well. Also, you can watch The Biggest Little Farm. It's a documentary about a family that started their own organic farm. And the one last thing I'm going to tell you about organics. So in addition to being better for you and better for the planet, and hopefully we can stop creating these dead zones in the oceans, it also, by the way, petrochemicals increase your risk of diabetes. It increases your risk of all kinds of health problems. So it's really important for your health not to have toxins and poisons on your food. But the other thing that's really good about all this greenery that we're seeing, the trees and the soil, are carbon sequestration. So this is a big piece of the puzzle when we talk about limiting our temperature rise to 1.5 degrees or less. We're already at 1, and we're going to hit over 1.5 by 2030 if we don't change things right now. But part of that solution is going to be planting more trees, planting more gardens, carbon sequestration in the soil and in our trees. Also preserving old growth forests, because the older the tree, the more carbon it has sequestered. So again, you know that your mantra today is wisdom, right? So if you start hearing a bunch of nonsense or arguments that are, again, nitpicking on little things that are not the real wisdom, that you want to be a steward of wisdom and you want to start spreading that a little bit, start a garden and start composting. And if you feel like it's something that needs to be done community-wide, then you got to start community organizing. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you again. And thank you for being part of the solution. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm in deep gratitude, wisdom today. Okay, talk to you tomorrow.